Good, let's see, afternoon, everyone. My name is Andra Jacques. My gender pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am a study abroad and international student advisor here in global education at UC San Diego. Let me change my view real quick. All right, so as Natalie said, this session is being recorded. The slides will be made available to everyone afterwards, but if you do not want your image on screen, go ahead and bring your video down. So I'll just share quickly a little bit about me so you know my background and where I'm coming from and why it's so important to me that students consider applying for prestigious scholarships and prestigious fellowships. My undergrad was at Point Loma Nazarene University, which is also here in San Diego. My major was international studies with a peace studies concentration. So we were housed in the political science department. So poli-sci is a soft place in my heart. I love political science students, and I try to partner with political science as much as possible because there are so many opportunities available to political science students, and I want to make sure that you know about them all, can consider if they're a good fit for you, and consider applying, because a lot of these opportunities are ideally looking for students in political science, international relations, international law. So when I was a student, I thought I wanted to work for the UN, and I knew I wanted to pursue a prestigious opportunity. I was thinking about the critical language scholarship for Albania at the time. And I was also considering the Fulbright, and then the world started falling apart, kind of like what's happening right now. So for those of you who are seniors, I understand what you're going through. So I graduated from my undergraduate program in 2008. So the economy crashed, and sort of all my lofty ideas of doing all of these things just sort of floated away. I felt like I needed to do the responsible thing and get a job, and jobs were really, really hard to come by for new college grads in 2008 when the economy crashed. I happened to get a job in my study abroad office. The timing just worked out. Folks were retiring. I was already working there as a student assistant. So I just kind of slid on in, and I've been working in study abroad now for, I think, for 13, 14 years. And it happens to be something that I love and am very passionate about. I studied abroad in Sicily when I was a student, and I was focused on the history, culture, and politics of the mafia in Sicily. But I've sort of just put all of my hopes and dreams about applying for these prestigious opportunities on hold, because I felt like, again, the more responsible thing for me to do would be to work. So in the end, I worked and I worked and I worked and I worked and I worked. And I chose a field, luckily, that provided lots and lots of travel opportunities for me, but sort of the opportunity to have that incredible type of experience abroad beyond my study abroad experience flitted away. And I felt like that was the end. And so after being in the field of global education for a while, I learned about a different type of Fulbright grant for folks in global education. They're called American International Education Administrator grants. So these are shorter term Fulbright grants for working professionals in the field to contribute to the type of educational exchange that the Fulbright is looking for. So I applied for a Fulbright grant and received it to Korea. So I went to Korea in summer 2017. I visited with a total of 13 Korean institutions in my time there. Made presentations, exchanged ideas about our student exchanges with Korea. Korea, if you don't know, is one of the top destinations for, well, the US is a top destination for Korean international students. It goes China and then Korea as far as the number of students studying in the US. And then for UC San Diego, Korea is our number 3 most popular destination for students to study. So I had a lot to say about global exchange with Korea and a lot to learn from my Korean colleagues. So that experience absolutely changed my life, and I was so grateful that I was able to have a Fulbright experience. It wasn't the type of Fulbright experience I thought I was going to have as I was exiting my undergrad program, but I am a Fulbrighter, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means and what access to the Fulbright network means. But I just wanted to give you that background about me, why this is so important, and I can tell you that I have helped, at this point, hundreds of students to have these types of experiences. So I want to offer myself as a coach to all of you, and I'm here to support you if you want to consider doing this. So that being said, let's get into the presentation. So I'll have Natalie share her screen and get the presentation up. Okay. So let's start with Fulbright. You know, Fulbright is just the name of Fulbright comes with a lot of prestige, and this will come into play when we talk more about the your essays. Whether you're a STEM student, a social science student, an arts student, whatever it is you're studying, whatever is your area of expertise, has to be something that's also important to that country. So when we start to talk about the types of grants that are out there, it's really important that you see a match in what you want to do and what the country is interested in. And so, I mean, William J. Fulbright was a good guy, and he also had a lot of influence over the U.S. government. So the Fulbright program is founded exclusively by the U.S. government. And I do want to reiterate today that all of the opportunities that we're discussing today are exclusively available for U.S. passport holders. So you do have to be a citizen of the U.S. to participate in these experiences. And I apologize in advance if any folks here don't meet that eligibility requirement, because all of these opportunities are funded through the State Department. You do have to be a US citizen to participate. And so there are Fulbright offices in cities and countries all over the world. And so, for example, my Fulbright was in Korea. My grant had to be approved by the US Fulbright Commission as well as the Korean Fulbright Commission. And that's the same for every grant. The Fulbright Commission in each country has to agree on each grant recipient. So here's me. This was on my first day in Korea. Today we're going to talk about the Fulbright student program. As I mentioned, my grant was for professionals in the field of global education. There are tons and tons and tons and tons of grant options out there. Grants for working professionals, grants for researchers, grants for English teachers, grants for students who want to earn degrees, grants for students who want to do research. The key to Fulbright is finding a grant that is a good fit for you. So within the student program, there are 3 main grants that you could consider. There's a study grant, which means the Fulbright would pay for you to obtain a degree abroad. There's a Fulbright research grant, which means Fulbright would pay for you to do research that both the US and your host country would find beneficial. And then there are the English Teaching Awards, or ETAs, where Fulbright will pay for you to teach English in another country. I'll say just off the bat with the ETAs, that's the easiest Fulbright grant to get. We'll talk about why these are competitive, but why all of you are still good candidates, even though these are competitive. But I'll just say that the ETAs are the easiest grants to get. And then on top of these awards, you can apply for the Critical Language Enhancement Award, which means they'll give you a funding boost for you to study what is considered a critical language in a host country where the critical language is spoken. And so they'll give you extra money to study that on top of either teaching English or studying or doing research. The Fulbright awards 2,000 grants annually. And when I say Fulbright, I mean just the US Commission awards 2,000 grants annually. Each country also issues their own grants to their own citizens. And currently there are more than 140 countries available in the Fulbright program. So that's quite a lot. So there's kind of something out there for everyone. So for the Study Research Awards, which they call field grants, they are looking for folks in specific areas. These are the top areas, and that's why I added and more, because social science, you will see, is not listed, but Fulbright accepts tons and tons of social science students. The areas you see here are priorities right now. They're always looking for more students in these areas because they actually receive a lot of applications from social sciences. I mentioned this earlier, it's all about finding the grant that is the right fit for you. So even when I was looking through the grants in each of these sections within arts, business, journalism and communication, STEM and public health, there were social science connections in every single one of these. So don't, write off a section, don't write off arts just because you're not an arts major. There are generally social science connections in each one of these. In fact, when I was looking at the journalism communication section, there was a grant that's all dedicated to social justice. And so for those of you who are interested in social justice, there might be a grant in that section that you might be interested in. This was me in the library. I think I was at Yonsei University here. So that's one of the libraries at Yonsei. So for the ETAs, they will place you in a school, usually K through 12, but sometimes up to university level to teach English. So you are not the lead teacher, you're an assistant to a teacher there to teach the students English. And I think it's pretty awesome. I got to spend some time with two of the ETAs that were in Korea. I think it's pretty awesome because even if you've never taught students before, but if you just like young people and you feel like teaching English is something that you could do, it's a pretty easy gig and you have tons of downtime to do whatever you want. So I'll say this, when we arrived for our Fulbright, I was with, there were a total of 8 of us who received grants to Korea that year for the American International Education Administrators. There were 8 of us, and we arrived in Seoul, exited the airport, each of us were handed an envelope of cash, and that was like our cash for the entire trip. So I don't know if anyone's ever been handed that much cash before, but it's kind of daunting to be handed an envelope of cash. It paid, well, let me come back to this. I'll come back to that. But those ETAs got those same envelopes of cash. So they had everything funded for them. And when they were not teaching English and not studying Korean, the world was theirs. So they got to travel, they got to go around the city, they got to volunteer, they got to join clubs and orgs at the local universities. There's plenty of time to just be free in addition to doing doing the job that you were there to do. I put cultural ambassadors there because that's what a Fulbrighter is seen as, a cultural ambassador. You're there to represent your country and to exchange, yes, educational exchange, but also cultural exchange. So one of the big parts of the application process is kind of doing a check on you. They're going to speak to your references to see, like, would you be a good cultural ambassador for the US? And then for the ETAs, each country offers between 2 and 100 awards. I will say in Asia, that's where you'll see upwards of 100 awards being offered. In Korea, for example, there are tons of ETAs because everybody wants to make sure that their students speak English well, because again, we receive so many Korean students who study, just complete their degrees in the US. So if you are wanting to apply for a location that is going to offer a lot of awards, that would be definitely Asia. For the Critical Language Enhancement Award, I really want to emphasize critical language. So if you wind up getting a Fulbright grant to France, you're not going to be able to apply for the Critical Language Enhancement Award. I'll go through a slide later that explains what the critical languages are, but this is really an opportunity for Fulbright to offer more US citizens who speak critical languages and to provide you the opportunity to hone your language skills in country so that you can be a better researcher, be a better student, be a better English teacher. So that's the idea of the Critical Language Enhancement Award. Okay, here we go. So the current critical languages, I checked the list yesterday. So these are as current as they can possibly be for critical language. Why did I do these in 2 different colors? There's a reason. I think I'll talk about this more when I talk about the critical language scholarship in terms of whether or not you have to have any background in any of these languages. All the languages that you see in orange, you do not have to have background in those languages in order to be eligible for the CLS. I think that's it. Oh, right now, those are the only eligible countries. So basically, due to COVID and due to the State Department's travel advisory list, the level 3 countries and above, we had a lot of countries drop off the list. So if you're planning to do a Fulbright in China, Egypt, Indonesia, Jordan, Morocco, or Russia, then you can add the critical language enhancement or apply for the critical language enhancement award. In normal times, that list is much longer. But these are the only countries that are eligible at this time. So for those of you who are in your first or second year and are considering this for when you're graduating, I imagine that this list will be very, very different, but this is the case for right now. And we'll talk a little bit more later about when you're supposed to apply and all of that. All right, so what are the benefits? Going back to that envelope of cash. So if you receive a grant, they're going to pay for your round trip transportation to and from host country. So that'd be round trip airfare to and from your host country. So they booked my plane ticket. And I didn't have to worry about any of that. They give you a stipend to cover all of your expenses. That was that envelope of cash I mentioned. All my housing was prearranged for me. Tons and tons of meals were prearranged for me. And if I didn't have meals on my itinerary, that's where that cash came into. And all of my ground transportation was arranged for me. For those of you who will be on longer Fulbrights, most of you, when you're applying for these, you'll be there for 6 months at least or a year. They'll provide your housing, whether it's university housing or an apartment. And then they'll provide you funding for a bus pass if that's like the primary mode of transportation, or if it's train or trolley or whatever in that country, all of that's paid for. So you don't have to pay for any of your own money. It was a little bit shocking actually how much money I got. It was like more money than I needed. So, you know, in Korea, sheet masks, like face masks are kind of a major thing for skincare. And so I was able to buy tons of sheet masks. Like even my fun time expenses were all covered by Fulbright. And then really, really, really comprehensive international health insurance. So if anything were to happen to you, from a major medical emergency down to just a regular doctor's visit, all of that's covered by your Fulbright international health insurance. And then they provide you 24/7 support. So if anything should happen to you, you have an emergency phone line that you can call, and someone will be there to help you out. That's for all awards. For some awards, and these ones are usually related to the research grants and the study grants, they provide you additional funding for all of your books and for any cost that might be associated with your research. That could include additional travel expenses, expenses to set up a study that's involved with your research, whatever that might be, they can provide additional funding for that. Midterm and enrichment activities, that basically equals fun time travel. So let's say you receive one of the study awards, you're completing your graduate degree abroad, and your school's on fall recess or spring recess. They give you cash so that you can go travel to the other side of the country or go do something else. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be related to your research or to your study, just fun. Cultural exchange, right? Full or partial tuition. So I would say for most of the grants, it's full tuition. I was looking the other day, some of the grants are partial tuition, so you would be responsible for the other part of the tuition, but most of them are full tuition. And then language study program. So even if you don't receive the language enhancement award or you don't qualify for that, but you want to study the host language, and in some cases they can provide you additional funding to join a language class or a language program. And then in my case, for example, we had a pre-departure orientation in LA. So we traveled to LA to meet up with my fellow Fulbrighters prior to our departure. And also we were able to meet up with the Korean Fulbrighters who were currently in the US. And then we also had in-country orientation. So you're not on your own. You don't have to try to figure anything out on your own. Everything is going to be explained to you before you leave. All right, so I mentioned eligibility earlier. You do have to be a US citizen. You have to have your bachelor's degree by the time you start your grant. So for example, and I'll talk more about timeline later, but if you're a senior, you're going to start your application process the summer before your senior year. It's due in fall of your senior year. You're going to find out in spring of your senior year. And then your grant period will begin like in late summer usually, or early fall following your senior year. The rest of that stuff is pretty straightforward, but I would say in addition to what you see listed here, you have to meet the eligibility requirements for each individual grant. So a grant might say you need to have 1 year of Chinese language, or you need to have 2 years of Russian, like whatever it says, you need to meet those eligibility requirements as well. And this kind of funny thing about Fulbright, They don't mind if you have a little bit of experience in the host country, but they don't want you to have lots of experience in the host country. So if you lived in your country of interest for a while, or let's say you studied abroad there for an entire academic year, that could actually work against you. They don't want you to have more than 6 months of experience in your host country. All right, so this is the UC San Diego contact and grad division for Fulbright. This is your warning for the grad division. Michelle is fantastic, but she is the advisor for every prestigious fellowship out there, which is a lot. And I can say that even though Fulbright is really important to me and Fulbright is really important to a lot of folks on our campus, it's not as important to the grad division as it ought to be. So basically, Fulbright students aren't as much of a priority as some of the other fellows. That being said, global education thinks it's really important, and I can be your contact also. So if you're interested in Fulbright, you can reach out to Michelle, but please copy me so I can help facilitate communication with the grad division. And then I will do sessions later on. I usually do another session later in spring about the application process. Application process for Fulbright will open in the spring, and we work with students throughout the summer to get ready. So just know that I'm available as a resource here. This is our UCSD Fulbright website, fulbright.ucsd.edu. Know that I'm available. All right, moving right along, critical language scholarship. Oh, I did not mean to set this like this. That's weird, sorry. So the purpose of the CLS is to expand the number of Americans studying and mastering foreign languages. So when they decided to set up the CLS, they were like, hey, folks in other countries speak tons of languages, and a lot of folks in the US only speak one language or one or two languages, and we want to do something about that. And we want to have more US citizens who speak critical languages because it's important to the US government in terms of national security and cultural exchange to have more folks speaking what they consider to be critical languages. I will say more often than not, critical languages are exclusively considered critical languages if they are important to national security. So when you start to see that list of languages and countries, you'll start to see that too. So for example, none of the Latin languages are considered critical languages. So if you're thinking about studying Latin languages, that's awesome, but they're not considered critical languages. So national security, economic prosperity, and that list of languages is set by the State Department each year, and it also changes each year. So as the priorities of the US State Department change, that list of languages changes. All right, so currently for critical languages, if you're wanting to apply for the CLS and you have never studied a language, you're going to want to focus here on the left category, the languages with no previous study required. And so I would say this is probably the 4th year in a row that this list has not changed. I always see these languages listed on the no previous study required. So if you're thinking about it and you haven't studied a language, here you go. If you do have a little bit of previous language study, then Arabic, Korean, Portuguese, and Russian could be for you if you've studied one of these for a year, or if you will consider studying one of these for a year. I would say of this list, Korean is probably most popular and Arabic is the second most popular. Both of those are offered at UCSD. So if you are a freshman or a sophomore, you have time to get your 1 year of previous study in to be eligible to apply for the CLS for one of these languages. And then if you have studied Chinese or Japanese for 2 years, or will have by the time you apply for the CLS, then you would be eligible to study in China or Japan and continue that study. I will say for one of our students who received the CLS, his name is Noble. He studied abroad multiple times with us. One of his study locations was China. Noble studied Chinese language here at UCSD and studied Chinese when he did his study abroad in China. So he was eligible for the CLS, which he applied for in his senior year and received. So he did his CLS the summer after his senior year in China. He had already studied for 2 years. And let's see, do I talk about this? The CLS program is 8 to 10 weeks of study, which they consider to be equivalent to 1 year of language study. That's how intensive your time is there. So you spend your summer 20 hours a week studying that language. And so if you've already studied, for example, 2 years of Chinese and you complete your CLS, by the time you're done, they will consider that to be 3 years of Chinese language, which they also consider to be incredibly useful to the US government. So the purpose really at the end of the day of all these grants is to make you an excellent candidate for opportunities in the future. And as political science students, law students, international relations students, that's super important. So the goal is for the US government to pay to make you an even better candidate for awesome job opportunities in the future. Really quickly, eligibility for CLS. Again, you have to be a US student. You have to have completed your degree. For those of you who are seniors and who have already missed out on CLS for this summer, but you're planning on doing grad school, you can apply for CLS in grad school. So keep that in mind. You'll have to do it for you have to have completed one academic year at your institution in order to be eligible for CLS. So if you're planning to apply for grad school, apply for it. Let's say you're going straight to grad school next year. Awesome. Apply for CLS in the fall, and you could potentially get it to do the summer in between your first and second year of grad school. You can receive the CLS more than once. I don't know anyone who's done that, but it's definitely possible. In addition to your 20 hours a week of language study, they will also pay for you to have some pretty cool excursions that are related to your language study. So they take the other group of you and the other group of CLS students to go do some pretty cool field trips that are related to your language learning. I mentioned this before for Fulbright, but they're really looking for people who are not going to be a problem. And it sounds kind of funny to say, but they reiterated that to me so many times during my application process. They need folks who are flexible, who are going to well represent the US, and who are not going to be a problem. So they want folks who are committed to whether it's language learning, research, study. They want folks who are committed to that, folks who are committed to educational and cultural exchange, who are going to work hard and who are not going to be a problem, because it's, a challenge. Studying, living, learning, adapting, working in another country and another culture is always a bit of a challenge for all of us. Even the most experienced travelers still struggle, and so they just need for you to not be a problem. At the end of the day, this is U.S. government we're talking about, and they don't want you to be a problem for the host government. So I kind of want to reiterate that as part of the process. You'll notice that they will be trying to figure out via your personal statements and via your letters of rec whether or not you're going to be able to handle it. Again, everything that's covered by this award, your round trip airfare, you have your pre-departure orientation and UC in DC. So you'll travel from your hometown to DC before you travel to your host city. They'll take care of all your visa fees, all the costs associated with your travel and your living, your meals, all of that's going to be covered. You don't have to pay for anything. Yep, they do language assessments and they pay for those too. And the cool thing about CLS is you can receive academic credit. So for those of you who are considering doing it during your time in your undergraduate program, you can potentially receive academic credit for your 20 hours a week you're going to be putting into your language study. All right, so let me look at time. All right, good. Let's talk about the Boren. So the Boren Scholarship, there's a Boren Scholarship and a Boren Fellowship. And I wanted to include this in this presentation because you all are political science students and you're some of the most eligible students for Boren. You're the type of students that Boren is looking for. So David L. Boren started the Boren program at the same time he was basically starting the National Security Education Program, or NSEP. He was saying that the US needed more experts in language. So you'll see that this is a common theme here with all of these. The US does understand that we have a severe language deficit that we're not tapping into, and that we need to be training up citizens to speak, especially critical languages, to be of great use to the US in terms of our, mostly in terms of our national security, but for lots of other reasons. So there is quite a lot of funding that's dedicated to this, and that's what this scholarship is for. So the Boren Undergraduate Scholarship is for undergrad students who are studying abroad during their undergrad. That's the easiest way to think about it. They have a preference for students to study for an academic year, but they will also fund students who are studying abroad for a semester. So you can see here how much funding is associated with your length of study. So I'll say the average semester study is about 12 to 15 weeks. So that's where this comes in here, 12,500. But again, they have a preference for academic year. So that means they will give you up to $25,000 for your academic year program. None of you are STEM majors, so I guess we won't talk about that. But that's like basically the biggest study abroad scholarship in existence. There are no other programs or no other scholarships that will provide you that much funding for your study abroad program. So it's quite a lot. The Boren Graduate Fellowship, for those of you who are seniors and who are planning to go to grad school, they will fund you fund your study abroad experience, or we'll say research and language study experience, up to $25,000 for programs that are at least 25 weeks and 12,500 for programs that are 12 to 24 weeks. So if that's something you're wanting to fit into your grad experience, you can do that. So there are two types of programs that Boren will consider. The first is their own programs that they've developed. So they call these their regional flagship language initiatives. So you can choose from one of the programs on this list. These are exclusively language courses. So Boren will pay for you to study these languages for the length of time that we previously discussed, if that's of interest to you. But what most students do is design their own program or select their own program. So let's say right now you are planning to study in, we'll use Korea again. You're planning to study in Korea next year, like next fall. That's great. Or this fall 2021. Awesome. You can apply for the Boren. So really, it just has to not be in Western Europe. It can't be in Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. So if we're talking about countries outside of those locations and you're not a citizen of that country, then you can be eligible for the Boren. So again, I have never seen them fund a student who's only studying abroad for a semester, but we have had plenty of students receive the Boren who are studying abroad for academic year in non-Western or non-South Pacific country. So if that's you, I would strongly encourage you to consider applying for the Boren. This is their list of preferred countries. They just updated this the other day. So this is the list. Those that are asterisked on the right-hand side, like Russia and Saudi Arabia, currently they will not fund you because those countries have level 4 or higher State Department travel advisory warnings. So that probably shouldn't, if you're looking at the list, that probably shouldn't be surprising to any of you, but every other country on that list is up for grabs. So if you're thinking about studying in any of those places, the Boren could be for you. Again, pretty standard eligibility requirements that we've seen already here. And again, they're focusing on language study as part of your study abroad experience. And they really want to see a connection between your language study, your country, and your field of study. So all that should make sense, and that would make sense in your personal statement to wrap all that together. Here's why I want to study this language in this specific country. Here's how this fits into my area of study. Here's how this fits into my career plan. And here's how this fits into plans for the US. And when I talk about plans for the US, I mean, once again, national security, and then also public service. So as part of the Boren, you have to write, Boren application process, you have to write 2 essays. Your first essay is going to be focused on national security. So how your program experience would contribute to national security for the US. The list that I have here, it says includes, but not limited to. These are the areas that they consider to be part of national security, but this is not a finite list. So there are lots and lots of other areas that you may consider to be part of national security. I think something that's missing on here, for example, I've seen students argue for is like arts education. There's a lot that goes into education piece that could be considered part of national security. So if you, whatever your niche area is, you can if you can make a sound argument in your essay for why this would contribute to national security in some way, they will consider it. So you can use this list as a starting point, but you can certainly go beyond that. Your second essay is focused on how your experience abroad can contribute in some way as public service to the United States government. So part of the requirement for the Boren is that you would give 2 years of public service to the US government, which may seem daunting, but it's not, because 2 years of public service can be all kinds of things. It can be working for a nonprofit. It can be working for a non-governmental organization. It can be teaching English. It can be, yes, working for the State Department. It can be working for your local congressperson. It can be lots and lots of different things, but they do require that you give 2 years of public service to the US government at the completion of your Boren, or by the time you graduate. And the good thing about that is they will help facilitate that for you. So you don't have to try to do that on your own. The Boren network is vast, and so they will help connect you to whomever you need to be connected to so that you can get a job and give your 2 years of public service. So what I like about this is it's kind of like an easy way to get a job post-grad. So I don't want the 2 years of public service to scare any of you, because they will help facilitate that for you. Okay, deadlines and timelines for these programs. So Fulbright is already done for 2021, 2022. So the next cycle is for the 2022, 2023 cycle. So applications are going to open this coming spring, 2021. They'll be due fall, usually October, around October 1 is the deadline. Grant recipients find out, they do first notifications at the end of January, then you go through another process and you get your final confirmation in something like March. And then you would leave for your Fulbright either in the summer or the fall of 2022. Critical language scholarship is already done for summer 2021. So we were talking about summer 2022. The applications will open this fall 2021 for summer 2022. Boren is right upon us right now. So if you are thinking about Boren for academic year 2021, 2022, your application time is right now. The deadline is February 3rd. In fact, I think you have to turn it into our office. I should have put this on there. I think you have to turn it into our office January 25th. So if you're thinking about Boren for this next year, contact us right away so we can get you started on that process. All right, why should you even do this? Like, what is in it for you? Why should you consider doing this? I am all about traveling and living abroad on someone else's dime. When I studied abroad on tons and tons of scholarships. When I have traveled throughout my 13, 14-year career, it has always been on the dime of my employer or on the dime of the US government. My Fulbright was on the dime of the US government. So yes, you can pay for your own travel experiences, but that's really difficult to do and it's really expensive. So why should you do it yourself when somebody else could be paying for it? It's also to elevate your academic experience and skills and to build your resume. So you all are political science students. That is a competitive field to be in terms of getting a job in the future. You're all high performing, you all want it real bad, and so you're competing with students who are all just like you. So to have these types of experiences, a CLS, be a Fulbrighter, to have a Boren Award on your resume is a pretty big deal and a pretty easy way to set yourself apart from other students who are just as eager and just as competitive as you. Compete at a higher level for future job opportunities. That's that same thing, and access the network of fellows globally. So for example, for Fulbright, once a Fulbrighter, always a Fulbrighter. I'm a member of the San Diego chapter of the Fulbright Association. I have folks reach out to me all the time from Fulbright Network who are other Fulbrighters. You can go onto the Fulbright Network, type in a country and look up all the Fulbrighters, all the grant recipients from Fulbright for that country and reach out to them. So I've had people reach out to me for informational interviews or to connect in other ways for other opportunities. You have access to that full network. So when it comes to job hunting, it's all about the network, who you know. And so having access to the Boren network, having access to the Fulbright network is a pretty big advantage. You can engage in cross-cultural exchange. That's what we love. That's why I work in this field. I'm sure that's why so many of you are interested in international relations because you want to have that kind of cross-cultural exchange. And also it's really fun. When I was doing my Fulbright, I worked, you know, I started the day at 7, I ended the day at 10, and it was really, really rigorous, but I was having the time of my life. Was I tired? Yes, I was tired. When I was wrapping gifts in my hotel room late at night for my visits for the next day, I was extremely tired, but I was having so much fun. And it's fun to do these things. You're going to work hard, but you're going to have a great time. Okay, that's the end of my formal presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. I see some stuff in the chat, and I also want to answer. Okay, none of this is for me. I also want to answer questions that you folks submitted. I know that was a lot of information. Right off the bat, UCDC. So UCDC is not run out of our office. UCDC is run out of Academic Internship Programs, AIP. So their website is aip.ucsd.edu. I am a big fan of the UCDC program. It's a fantastic program opportunity, especially for poli-sci students like you. So if you're thinking about UCDC, definitely do that, but that's not from our office. Can current seniors apply? So a lot of what I talked about today is not going to work for you if you are a current senior. But if you are planning to go to grad school, then many of these opportunities can still be available to you. So actually all 3 of them can still be available to you for grad school. So you do have to be in grad school or planning to apply to grad school. I'll say for Fulbright, if you want Fulbright to fund your grad school, take a look at the options that are available for graduate students, and you need to apply to those institutions and be admitted to those institutions to be eligible to actually receive those funds. So for example, let's say you're planning to apply for graduate school in Belgium, because I saw the other day they have a grad school grant for students in Belgium. You have to apply to that Belgian institution, be admitted to that Belgian institution, and then apply for your Fulbright and receive your acceptance letter from your institution in order to be eligible to receive that grant to fund your program. So take a look at those things. When it comes to prerequisites for these opportunities, it's all very specific to each one. So again, Fulbright as an example, every single Fulbright grant has a list of eligibility requirements that are very, very specific. So there's like the minimum eligibility requirements that they'll list on the Fulbright, the CLS, and the Boren sites. But for Fulbright in particular, every single grant has their own eligibility requirements related to area of study, related to minimum language, if that's a thing, related to your contributions to the host government or the host institution. So you really want to look at the eligibility requirements for each individual grant. This next question, for people who feel like they're lacking in experience, how would you advise them on approaching internships and scholarships? It has always been my approach to apply for things that perhaps on paper it doesn't really seem like I would be eligible for, because it's all about the way that you write your personal statement and the way that you present yourself. For example, the Fulbright grant that I applied to is typically awarded to chief international officers, senior global education directors, or at minimum a director of study abroad. It's very, very unusual for a general study abroad advisor to receive that grant. But I looked at it and said, I felt like I qualify for these things. And that's what I brought across in my essay. And they felt that they agreed. And so I was technically the lowest ranking grant recipient. I'm also, I think, the youngest grant recipient for Korea for my particular grant. So I say that to say, yes, you obviously need to meet the eligibility requirements, but I don't want you to feel like you lack the experience or the qualifications to apply for something like this. None of these grants care about your GPA. That's not part of this application process. They care about how this works into your overall academic career and personal goals and what you can contribute to the U.S. government as a result of that. So again, none of these are about your academic qualifications. They don't necessarily care about what's on your resume. They care about what you want to do and how you're going to do that and why you have to convince them to invest in you. Why should they give you what is the equivalent of thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for you to go live in another country and represent the US? Like, why should they do that? That's what you're going to bring across in your essays. Application timeline for Nearly all of these, well, at least for CLS and for Fulbright, application deadlines are in the fall, and you have a lengthy waiting process that heads all the way into spring. So I applied for the Fulbright. My Fulbright application was due in October 1st. I sat there and waited and waited and waited. I found out at the end of January that I had made it past the first round. Then they did another round of interviews and background checks on me. And I found out in March that I received the grant. So it's a pretty lengthy application process, and it's basically the same for any of the other Fulbright grants and also for the critical language scholarship. For the Boren, that application deadline, like I said, it's January, February, and Boren fellows and Boren scholars find out if they've received it um, in the springtime. For those of you who feel like you don't have the time or the schedule that would permit you to do this, that's maybe a conversation we can have about traditional study abroad experiences. Most of these experiences are postgraduate experiences. So if you feel like you can't fit study abroad into your time in school, we can have a different conversation about that. Um, but maybe consider the CLS because that's a summer opportunity, unless you have work or family um, things that you have going on in the summertime. Perhaps you can make a summer program fit. I know it's difficult if you have a job and you can't take 8 to 10 weeks off of your job. I totally understand. Potentially consider a postgraduate opportunity if you can't make it fit into your undergraduate time. Um, for someone who is specifically interested in law and government, I would definitely consider the Boren. You're like exactly who they're looking for. Again, national security is kind of like the most important element of Boren scholars and fellows. And so if you can adequately illustrate to them that the work that you want to do in the future would contribute to national security, then Boren would be the one for you. Some of the Fulbright grants are also dedicated to that, so you can look for those grant opportunities as well. How to stand out as an applicant. It all boils down to your personal statements. For each of these, you generally have to write at least 2 essays. I know for my Fulbright grant, I had to write two different statements. One was my program proposal statement, and one was a statement about my host institution and why they should care about my institution. The UC, everybody cares about the UC, and everybody cares about UC San Diego. So that part wasn't as hard as my project statement. But your goal, again, is to convince them that you are worth investing in. So if they're going to spend all this money on you, in what ways are you going to contribute to cultural exchange, educational exchange, national security, the sort of future of the US and the US's relationship with that host country? And so they're looking for in your personal statement and in your letters of rec that you are worth investing in. And so when I coach students, we spend a lot of time on your personal statement. How will this experience fit into your personal career and academic goals? You have to be able to weave a narrative through your personal statement that is compelling for the reader and compelling for the commissions to invest in you. This question is, how can you stand out as an undergraduate student for the critical language scholarship? You need to be able to adequately express your commitment to language study. Not just like, I love Korean, I want to study Korean because I love Korean. Like, I want to be able to use Korean because I want to work in US Pacific relations moving forward. I want to work in international business for the Asia Pacific region. I want to be able to contribute to stabilizing the Asia Pacific region on behalf of the US. They need to be able to see that connection between you wanting to study this language, them investing in you studying this language, and how that's going to contribute to your career plans in the future, your personal plans in the future, and ultimately the US government. That's the same for all of these. Other questions? You can either type into the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and let me know what we're missing here. I know this is a ton of information. It's a lot to think about. Again, I really want to encourage you, if you're sitting there thinking like, I would never get this, it's really competitive. It is really competitive, but that doesn't mean that you wouldn't get it. Fulbright gives out 2,000 awards per year. 2,000 individuals receive all that funding every year. You could be one of those individuals. Again, it's not about your grades, it's not about your background, it's about the way that you can present yourself in these essays that you are worthy of this investment. Questions, comments? The chat is so quiet. Natalie, anything from you?
I have no other questions for me, but just thank you so much for sharing this. I know it's difficult for a lot of students, right now, and then with a recession and with what's going on. But I definitely echo what you have to say as far as, going forward with these opportunities, even if you don't think you'll get it, because let them make the decision. Don't make the decision yourself. Because you never know what can happen, and these could be amazing opportunities that change your life in so many ways. But I do see a question that popped up in the chat, so I'll hand it on back to you.
Yes, you can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Andrew Jacques, exactly the way it's written here. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Please feel free to email me or send me a VAC message. You'd send a VAC message to Study Abroad and mention my name and it will be forwarded to me. I am happy to have a one-on-one appointment with you to discuss one of these opportunities further. I'm happy to read drafts of essays. As I mentioned, I coach students through this process. I consider myself a personal statement pro at this point. And to this day, I'm still always applying for prestigious opportunities because, again, I like to have other people pay for my professional development and other people to pay for my travel opportunities. So that could be you too. You don't need to pay for your own trips. Let somebody else pay for them. So I'm here for all of you. Please connect with me, and I'm happy to help in whatever it is you're trying to get done. All right, everyone. Awesome. It's 1 o'clock. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate all of you. Be well this week. Take care of yourselves, and we'll all chat again soon.